الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا وحبيبنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحابته ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم افتح علينا حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. وصل اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الكرام. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Alhamdulillah. The subject of Tawheed is probably the single most important subject for Muslims to have some level of knowledge of. I've been accused of saying that you can learn Tawheed in 10 minutes. And I think I'll explain what I meant by that. Basic Tawheed is very simple. A person can say La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah and they're Muslim. Because La ilaha illallah can be explained very quickly what exactly it means. La ma'bud bihaqqin siwallah. There's nothing in reality worthy of worship except Allah. La ma'budan bihaqqin. There's nothing worshipped in truth except Allah. La ilaha illallah. There is no God except Allah. There's no God except the one true God. That basic understanding that's how you get into Islam. So from that point of view, it's very quick. That's why there's a Sahabi that said Shahada. That's all he did. He never prayed or fasted, and he went into a battle and he was killed, and he's famous for being the Sahabi that died and went to paradise without ever having prayed or fasted. But he said La ilaha illallah. Now the Arabs, the pre-Islamic Arabs knew Arabic, so they knew what la nafil al-jins meant. Like they didn't have that term for it. That's a grammatical term that came later. But they knew when you have la followed by a nakira that's mansoob, they didn't have those terms either. Those are grammatical terms, but they knew what it was. They knew when you have a fatha, even though they didn't call it mansoob, they knew la ilaha, not la ilahun. Because that changes the meaning. La ilahun. La ilaha. Nafil al-jins negates anything of what follows. Illa is mustathna. It's an exception. So in the fundamental creed of Islam, you have a negation and an affirmation. The first thing children learn to do is negate. That's why they say la. It's the first word most kids learn. La. No. Because negation is part of asserting something. One way to assert something is to negate. But the affirmation, which follows the negation, is done through an exception. So there is no God except Allah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the word Allah is a Semitic word. The Hebrews said El, like Jibra'il, Elohim is from the same root. Eloh, which is the Aramaic. Eloh. It's the only Aramaic that's left in the Gospel is Eloh, Lima sabachthani. I mean, that's the only thing in the Gospel from that language, which was probably the language that Isa alayhi salam spoke. So Allah is a proper name for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when we embark on Tawheed, there are certain prerequisites. The first thing, people here, inshallah, are what are called tulab al-ilm, seekers of knowledge. And seeking knowledge is one of the highest things that you can do. The Prophet ﷺ said, Al-bahthu anhu jihad. To seek knowledge is actually jihad. And he also said that mudhakaratuhu, just doing mudhakara is tasbih. It's like saying subhanallah. So when you're actually reviewing your classes, your notes and things, that is dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the Prophet said, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ مُعَلِّمًا, I was only sent to teach people. And he's a teacher. He also said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, that مُعَلِّمُ النَّاسِ الْخَيْرِ, the people that teach people good, get the reward of the people they teach. وَلَا يُنْقَصُ مِنْ أَجْرِ فَاعِلِهِ, and it doesn't diminish from the reward of the one doing it. And that's why that goes on until the end of time. So if everything that every Muslim has ever done of good goes back to the Prophet ﷺ, because they do it with that niyyah, and the Prophet taught them niyyah. The Prophet taught us wudu, he taught us prayer, he taught us Tawheed, he taught us all these things. So everybody that's ever learned that until the end of time has that reward, goes back to the Prophet ﷺ, it goes back to the teachers. And one of the blessings of this tradition is the chain of narration, the chain of transmission, that people learn things based on these chains. So we're all links in the chain. And whoever's teaching something that's learned it from a teacher, who learned it from a teacher, who learned it from a teacher, goes back to, like in the case of this book, Imam Tahawi's book, it goes back to Imam al-Tahawi. But Imam Tahawi learned from his mother, al-Mazani, al-Tahawiyah. al-Tahawi, Imam al-Mazani's sister. She's also called Ukht al-Muzani. And he learned from his uncle, Imam al-Muzani, one of the great Shafi'i scholars. And Imam al-Muzani learned from Imam Shafi'i. Imam Shafi'i learned from Imam Malik. Imam Malik learned from Nafi'. Nafi' learned from Ibn Umar. Ibn Umar learned from the Messenger of Allah. So the chain, even Imam Tahawi, the chain is unbroken. It all goes back to the Prophet ﷺ. So that's the blessing of the isnad. The Prophet ﷺ also said that إِنَّ الْمَلَائِكَةَ لَتَضَعُ أَجْنِحَتَهَا لِطَالِبِ الْعِلْمِ رِضًا بِمَا يَصْنَعُ, that even the angels put their wings down for the seeker of knowledge out of joy for what they're seeking knowledge. The Prophet ﷺ also said that مَنْ طَالَبَ الْعِلْمَ من طالب العلم من طالب العلم لله فالجنة في طلبه ومن طالب المعصية فالنار في طلبه. You know, that if you're seeking knowledge, paradise is seeking you. If you're seeking knowledge for Allah's sake. And if you're seeking disobedience, the fire is seeking you. And the Prophet ﷺ also, the Quran tells us, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, ask the people of knowledge if you don't know. And knowledge there are different types of knowledge. One of the basic aspects of knowledge, which is, it's not dialogical, it's didactic, that there's information. Somebody studies grammar, then they teach grammar. It's something you learn. So, inna Zaydan daraba amran. You know, that's if we're going to parse that sentence, you have to learn what inna is, what it does to a noun, like Zaydan. So it's mansub because of inna, and then you learn daraba as a fi'l, and it's mabni al fatha because it's a fi'l madi. And then you learn that Amran is mansub because it's maf'ulun bihi. That's something that you learn. And that needs to be taught. There's not a lot of discussion. You can ask questions like, why did Zayd hit Amr? And you can ask that question. I actually told the Mufti of Egypt that the problem in the Arab world is not going to stop until they change the grammatical sentences that they teach little kids, because it's always Zayd hit Amr, and you know, I said in the West we've got, you know, Dick sees Jane, which is another problem, you know. But anyway, So that's a knowledge, and either you know it or you don't know it. It's as simple as that. And so it's information. Now, in Aqidah, there's certain information. Now, you can read it in a book. Like that book there that is the Creed of Imam al-Tahawi. That book, you can read the book and you might have questions. And if you're clever, you can understand quite a bit of it, maybe all of it. And you might understand it better than the person that translated it. That's possible. So, but there is a blessing in studying with this chain. There's a blessing. We believe that. And that's part of what this tradition is about. So you can learn from books, but there's always a blessing to go through that. Now, at a certain point, especially with students, it's good to have mudhakara, which is where you actually discuss things that you're learning. And because mudhakara is a way that real questions begin to emerge, because a dialogical approach to knowledge is actually a lot better than the didactic approach. When you discuss things, you get quite a bit out of discussion. So it's very important to recognize that this isn't just a dump, that you come in your empty vessels and you get filled up. These things, they're meanings that you need to interact with to make them real for you, so that it's not just information. And it's important to think about these things and not just to take things. All of you here, almost all of you, I think, are adults. And, the religion is not real if it's not based on a real belief. And our religion has never shied away from questions. It's one of the beauties of the religion is that no scholar ever said you can't ask that, as far as I know. There are certain things that, come from arrogance and from other things. That's another thing. But genuinely, if somebody is genuinely trying to understand something, then there's usually answers. Now, some things, and particularly with when you get into Tawheed, when you're talking about the essence of God, there's real limitations because of the nature of language. So that's also understood, that this is about language. I mean, the book of Imam al-Tahawi is a book of words. It's words, and the words are about God, and God is the ineffable. God is what we really can't articulate. And language falls short of speaking about God. So before we get into that, I want to preface this by what are called the mabadi. Inna mabadi kulli fannin ashara, al-hadd wal-mawdu'u thumma thamra. That the foundation of all knowledge is the foundational principles of every knowledge are 10. There's 10 foundational principles of every knowledge. And before you start into that knowledge, it's good to know those foundational principles. The first one is called al-hadd, which in the English language, we call that a definition. It's important to know the definition of what you're studying. Now, a definition in logic is something that gets to the essence of a thing. When you define something, you have to define it essentially. And a definition should be inclusive and exclusive. It should include everything that thing is, and should exclude everything that it isn't. That's a real proper definition. So, to give you an example of this, the logicians say that a human being is a rational animal. Human beings are animals, but they're rational animals. And that is a definition because it gets to the essence of what a human being is. To be human is to be an animal, but also to be rational, to be sapiential, to be an animal that has intellect and the ability to reason. Other animals don't have that. So it excludes the irrational. It excludes the animals that are in instinct, that are working on instinct. And then you have the mawdu', which is the subject matter, what that thing is about. And then you have the thamra, which is the fruit. What's the benefit of that thing? وَفَضْرُهُ, and then you have the virtue of that thing, why that thing should be learned, because not all knowledge should be learned. There's some knowledges that are superfluous. There's some knowledges that are a complete waste of time. There's, astrology is a knowledge. It's you can study astrology and it's a knowledge, but it's a waste of time. Alchemy is a type of knowledge also. It's a waste of time. So there are knowledges out there, and that's why the Prophet said, Allahumma inni as'aluka ilman nafi'an. I ask you for beneficial knowledge that benefits me. Because information, there's a lot of information out there, but a lot of information is a complete waste of time. And I think most of us are filled with trivia that I personally would like those parts of my brain that have been occupied by that trivia back. But it's something that, unfortunately, we're stuck with that. Like commercial jingles that you can never get out of your head. I mean, I watched a woman literally dying of lung cancer sang a Chesterfield jingle, which was an old kind of cigarette back in the 40s or something. And she was cursing. She said, "Those liars." And I mean, she was literally dying, in the hospital. But she had that jingle that she heard when she probably first started smoking cigarettes. So there's a lot of things that we know that are just unfortunate. But this is not. I mean, this is an incredibly fruitful thing. And so knowing its virtue is knowing why it's worthy of our time and our consideration. وَنِسْبَةٌ, and then knowing what it relates to. In other words, what it's associated with. وَالْوَاضِعُ, and who is the first one that made that science. وَالِاسْمُ الْإِسْتِمْدَادُ حُكْمُ الشَّارِعِ, and then to know its name, because every knowledge has a name, or it has several names. To know its istimdad is to know what that knowledge is deriving its principles and its facts or its opinions, because there's knowledge is opinion also, it's not just fact, sound opinion. And what it's deriving them from. What are the sources of that knowledge? Al-istimdad. وَحُكْمَ الشَّارِعِ, and to know the legal ruling of that knowledge. To know the legal ruling. What is the ruling of that knowledge? Is it fard ayn? Is it fard kifaya? And then وَالْمَسَائِلُ بَعْضُهُ بِالْبَعْضِ يَكْتَفَى, and then to know the masail. So the subject is what it's talking about. The masail are the details of those things, what it's investigating. So, and then, in other words, the topics, because there's a difference between subject and topic. So the masail are the topics. And then he says, man dara al-jami' has al-sharafa. If you know all these things, then you've attained an honorable rank. So anyway, those are called the mabadi al-ashara. So in terms of Tawheed, the definition of it is the science that investigates the nature of God and the nature of prophecy and the nature of eschatology. In other words, the last things. So it looks at the nature of God, the mahiyya of God, the nature of prophets, and what are called the sam'iyat, those things that have been revealed and relate to the unseen matters that we don't really know about. And then the subject matter is the essence of God, the attributes of God, and the essence of prophets and the attributes of prophets, and then the articles of faith and the qadar, which was part of that. And then the benefit or the virtue, the benefit, the fa'idah of it is that it protects you from having mistakes in your understanding about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For instance, there are people that think that the universe is eternal. And in Tawheed, the Quran is very clear that Allah is badi'us samawati wal ard. He originated the heavens and the earth without any prior pattern. That's what badi' means. An originator that is working, that is bringing something into the world without any prior pattern. على غير مثال مسبق. And then he's also called Fatirus Samawati wal Ard, the one who brought forth the heavens and the earth. He's Khaliqus Samawati wal Ard. He's Al-Bari. He's Al-Musawwir. So the Khaliq is the one that brings it into existence out of nothing. The Bari is the one that fashions it, and then the Musawwir is the one that forms it into the forms that it takes. So the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has formed creation. For instance, there's people that deny design, which is pure. That is kufr. Like, to deny design is kufr. This is as simple as that. If you say this is all randomness and there's no real design here, that is the essence of. It's such a denial of what is so clearly obvious. No matter what mechanisms are being used to bring about the forms that exist in the world, the idea of denying design, that there is design here. And design necessitates a designer. So the benefit of Tawheed is to know the correct things about God and about the prophets. So to know, for instance, that the prophets are impeccable. There's a difference of opinion about whether they can do minor sins, what are called venial sins in Christianity. There's a difference of opinion, but the dominant opinion is that they don't even do that. That there's, and this is why there's a extensive literature in our tradition explaining all of the things that appear to be peccadillos or appear to be minor infractions of the prophets. You'll find that in the literature, explaining like that Ibrahim alayhi salam did not lie when he said, the big one did it, because he used his thumb, pointing with his thumb, things like that. I mean, sometimes they go to quite interesting lengths to prove that point, but the idea of the prophets doing anything major is absolutely, completely unacceptable. So learning that in Tawheed, learning also what a prophet is, like the nature of a prophet, learning that the prophets can get sick, but they can't have illnesses that would make them abhorrent to the people that they were sent to. So for instance, Ayub in the Islamic tradition, Job, his illnesses are not illnesses that the people were disgusted by. They were actually internal sicknesses. The people couldn't see them. Those are how that's one aspect of but the greatest benefit of all is that Tawheed is when you understand, you have theory and practice. When you understand real Tawheed, theoretically, for instance, that Allah is fa'alu lima yurid, He does whatever He wants, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot oppress His servants because of the nature of servanthood and the fact that we are part of the dominion of God, that the human being is created by God, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has complete and utter and absolute property rights over the human being. It's His mulk. and you are mamluk. You are a possession of God. And so whatever God wants to do to you, if he wants to give you the worst disease imaginable, la qadr Allah, God forbid, that it's not wrong. God can do whatever he wants. He can give you a joyous life. He can give you a miserable life. Allah can do whatever he wants. And that is the transcendent God. That's the God that is frightening. It's the Dhul Jalal. It's the God of Jalal. It's the God of tsunamis. It's the God of holocausts. It's the God of fire. It's the God of cancer. It's the God that takes little children from their loving parents. That is an aspect of God. And we're in submission to that aspect of God to the best of our ability, because that's part of God's nature. But he's also Dhul Jalali wal Ikram. He's the God of immense blessing. He's the God of overflowing bounty. And he's the God who hides his bounty in his terror. He's the God who hides his blessings in his tribulations. And so learning those things helps us deal with the vicissitudes of time, with the calamities of our lives, with the difficulties. And then finding out, for instance, that the prophets have the greatest tests. Because nobody who ever loses a child can feel anything but consolation when they learn that the Prophet ﷺ buried all of his children except for one. So the best of creation had all of his children taken from him, and yet he never complained. Even though he wept. He wept when he lost his children. We know that. It's in the hadith. But he never complained. And he said, God does not take you to account for your eyes. In other words, for your grief. But he takes you to account for what you say. Like, why did God do this to me? So that's one of the benefits, is learning the theory and then beginning to exercise the theory in the laboratory of life. Because this science is really about being out there in the world. And it's the fadl, the virtue of this science has the highest. It's the highest of sciences. Some of the ulama say fiqh is over, but because fiqh is how you worship Allah. But Tawheed generally is considered to be the highest. I mean, the mutakallimun and the fuqaha debate on this, but because the ta'alluq of this science, in other words, the relationship is with the nature of God, and that is the highest thing that humans can conceive of. It has the highest virtues. So this is the nisba is to the ulum al-shar'iyyah. It's related to the sciences of Islam, of Islamic law, and it's part of that science. The wadi', the one who formulated this science, is first and foremost, we believe it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the Quran, because the Quran is a revelation that tells us about the nature of God. It tells us that فَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. Know that there's no God but Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. Know that God is one. He tells us that He is the creator of the heavens and the earth. He tells us that He is قَاهِرٌ فَوْقَ عِبَادِهِ, that He is in complete control and overwhelms His servants with His qahariyah. He tells us He's al-hayyul qayyum, that He's the sustainer of the heavens and the earth. So much of the Quranic narrative is about God. If you ever have a red letter Quran that has the names of Allah in red, you can see how much of the Quran is about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in essence, it's all about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because even when it's about the prophets and their tribulations, it's still about the call to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So knowing that it is formulated by God Himself in the Quran, but then it's also the Prophet ﷺ is the one that gave us this. So by majaz. This is by not in reality, because in reality God is the one that gave us the knowledge of His nature, but the means is the Prophet ﷺ. And then by extension, the great formulators of this science are really three men. Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari is one of them, and he is a 4th century scholar who was one of the great Mu'tazilite scholars, and then he made tawbah from that, and he became the great advocate of what's called the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, which I'm going to get into in a moment. But Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari is a very maligned scholar of late. Historically, he was recognized by everybody as being one of the great Imams. I mean, even Ibn Taymiyyah is very clear in his praise of Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari. So when people attack the Ash'aris today, it's very odd for people that know the Islamic tradition to hear that. It doesn't mean that there weren't groups that were opposed historically, but they were never in numbers large enough to really warrant any, serious consideration. And then the other one is Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, who was in what's now Afghanistan. He was from there, and they were living at approximately the same time. And then the third one is probably Imam al-Tahawi. Now, generally, and what I was taught by a lot of my teachers was that the people of Haqq are the Ash'ari and the Maturidi, and everybody else is off. But I think it's undeniable that there is a third group of people that are the Athari people, and I think it's important to acknowledge that, because it's not really fair to isolate that group and say that somehow they're not part of the tradition, because they are. And one of the great examples of that is Ibn Abd al-Barr and the ulama of the Murabitun. Very few of them were Ash'aris. It was Qadi Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi who brought the Ash'ari madhab to Morocco and to Andalusia. But prior to that, they were more Athari in their approach, and they tended to really not like what is termed sometimes in English speculative theology or kalam, so dialectical theology. But it's important to distinguish between the Athariya, who are the people of Athar, and stick to the text without really bringing in what are called the aqliyat, or the rational sciences, to buttress the theology. Those people were not mujassima. They were not literalists. They were not people that thought that certain verses in the Quran were to be taken literally. They understood those verses did not mean what they outwardly were saying, but they were not going to say what they meant. They really left it to nu'minu biha ala muradillah. We believe in them according to what God says about them. And that is also a position within the Ash'ari and the Maturidi schools also. So that's not just the Atharis, but that is the early scholars and some of the later scholars from those schools. So when we study creed, we have to understand that creed develops out of problems. When the Prophet ﷺ came, he was not a theologian in that he didn't come with this systematic theology. He came with a truth about God, that God is one. And the Quran has a theology in it. But the Prophet ﷺ did not bring a type of creed that's formulated the way they are now. This came later. And the Sahaba were people that were in such a powerful experiential Islam They were living these truths. Imam Ali radiallahu anhu said that I never saw anything but except that I saw God before it, after it, and in it. In other words, that he was witnessing the af'al of God, the acts of God in creation. The idea that no leaf falls without the knowledge of God. So being aware of God in that way, in a very real presence, that was very much how these people were. And so they weren't going to debate things, and they just weren't interested in that. So when the Muslims came up against the Christians, who had a very profound theological tradition, because Christianity has much more emphasis on theology than it does on law, whereas the Jewish and the Muslim traditions have been more focused on law, on fiqh. So when they came up against the Christians in Syria and Iraq and Egypt, suddenly they were asking them questions they'd never been asked before. Like, the Quran says that Jesus is the kalima, the word of God, which in Greek is logos. And in the Gospel of John, it says in the beginning was the Word, the Logos, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So does that mean that Jesus is the Logos? In other words, is he the eternal Word of God? And so nobody had ever thought about that. And then they said, and when you say the Quran is Kalam Allah, does that mean that the Quran is the Logos? In other words, is the Quran created or is it uncreated? Nobody had ever asked them these questions. And so suddenly they were forced to think about things that they hadn't thought about before. Hence, theology. Because that is the means by which they were able to really come to some conclusions about these shubuhat. Because these are obfuscations that come into the teaching that create problems in the hearts of people. And the resolution of the problems comes through working through these problems and coming to conclusions about them. And this is what the mutakallimun did. This is what the theologians did. And they created creeds. And Imam al-Tahawi's creed is one of the earliest creeds. Abu Hanifa, there's a creed that's attributed to him that precedes this. And there's a debate, a big debate, about whether he actually wrote it or not. But Imam al-Tahawi is definitely in the line of that creed. Imam Tahawi's creed is almost identical to Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari's creed. They differ on 4 points, according to Imam al-Subki. And that's it. Abu al-Hasan, Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, whose creed is articulated in the Nasafiyya, is also very similar. He differs on certain things. And there's some interesting differences. And they're differences that are insoluble, in that you're not going to come to some kind of, you're not going to resolve these problems. So they're just there. And they are what they are. So having said that, the founders of these creeds are called the founders of this science as well. Now, Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari was very fortunate in having an absolute genius student, Abu Bakr al-Baqallani, who is probably one of the greatest intellects in human history. I mean, anybody that really looks at his work and his genius would have to come to that conclusion. And he really, he in essence is really one of the saviors of Islam, because at the time when the massive onslaught of Hellenistic rationalism was coming, when there were just so many sects, and he was refuting all these people with just really extraordinary brilliance and intellect. And one of the things that is important to understand about these creeds is that people that attack them, and I can really safely say this, almost have never studied them. And I found this consistently. What they do is they read their teachers who quote these people, and then they attack them from within their own frames of reference. And they rarely actually study, because when you say that, oh, this is a bid'ah, what is a bid'ah exactly? You show me where the bid'ah is. And they'll say, well, it's a bid'ah to say this or that. For instance, it's a bid'ah to say that the mushaf is not the kalam Allah, which is an Ash'ari position, that when you say kalam Allah about the Quran itself, the mushaf, that's why the Muslims differentiate between mushaf and Quran, right? We call the mushaf is the copy of the Quran. It's called a mushaf. And we use it when we say Quran, we're really saying it like majazan. So, but when we say the Quran, what is the Quran? The Quran is kalam Allah, غير مخلوق. It's the uncreated word of Allah. إنما كلامه قديم ما في تأخير ولا تقديم ولا نعم ولا لحن أو إعراب وكلنا وبعض أو اضطراب. You know, when the Quran is the word of Allah. It doesn't have syntactical precedents and antecedents. It doesn't have lahan, articulation. It doesn't have i'rab, inflection. It doesn't have part or universals or particulars. إذ كل إلى الحدوث انتسب, because all of these things are created by their nature. ككون علمه مكتسب ككون علمه على مكتسب, like saying God has acquired his knowledge. So when you say the Quran, the Mus'haf is Kalam Allah, we say that out of adab, because you don't want to say it's not the Kalam Allah. That's not the Kalam Allah. You can't say that. It is the Kalam Allah. But it's not the Kalam Allah that is ghayru makhluq, because it is in the world. It has paper. It has ink on paper. And it's language that came into the world. Whereas the Kalam Allah that is qadim is the meanings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala articulated in his essence. It's the meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has in his essence. So that's an example of solving a problem where these people were saying, are you saying that's uncreated? And if you say, well, yeah, that's uncreated, then you have a religion of people that think things that are created are uncreated. But if you say that the Quran is uncreated, essentially, then what you're saying is an attribute of God is created. The sifa of Allah, because kalam is a sifa of the mutakallim. The speech is an attribute of the speaker, the one speaking. And so if you say that his attribute is created, then you're saying that Allah is created, that there's an attribute that's created, and that creates a problem. And so this is in essence what these men were dealing with. And they did an extraordinary job. When you get to the free will and the determination, are human beings determined or are they free? These are paradoxical problems that have befuddled all the religious traditions that deal with these subjects. But if you look at the way they resolve them, they're quite stunning. They're still limited by language, but they're still quite stunning. And that's so when we talk about the founder, we're talking first and foremost that it's God that gave us this knowledge. It was transmitted by the Prophet ﷺ, but it was formulated by these great intellects that the community was provided with. And we believe it's providential care, because the Prophet ﷺ said that this knowledge would be protected by people in each generation. They protect it. And so that's what they've done. And Imam Tahawi is one of the great people of that science, and that's why his creed is so important. And then the name of this ismuhu is called Usul al-Din. It's called the Ilm al-Tawheed. It's called the Ilm al-Kalam. These are different names for this science, but generally it's called Usul al-Din. the roots of this religion, because it's what this religion is built upon is Tawheed. And this is the science of Tawheed. Ilm al-Kalam in early period is a very negative term, and you will see many statements of the early community attacking Kalam. And these are used in polemics, modern polemics, in books saying that Kalam is evil, and look what Imam Shafi'i said about Kalam, look what so-and-so said about Kalam. They were talking about the dialectical theology of the Mu'tazilite when they were talking about these things. They were not talking about the refutations of the Mu'tazilite, which come from the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, right? And it's important to understand that distinction. So, and then finally, the hukm al-shari' is fard ayn. It's considered fard ayn on every person. The topics of it, the masail, are covered in, you can see what the topics are in the book, but the topics that are dealt with are things like the basin, right, the hold of the Prophet, the pool of the Prophet, what that entails, the Yawm al-Qiyamah, what happens on the Yawm al-Qiyamah, what's hashar, what's nashar, what's qadar, what's the meaning. So these are the masail that it deals with, and then also like the Quran is kalam Allah, and then so that essentially is those are the mabadi al-ashara of this science. Now, what I'm going to do right now is just basically go through Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, what that means. Muslims are divided essentially into two major groups, the Sunni and the Shi'i. The Shia are, historically, they are the people that supported Imam Ali in his push for, they were called Shi'atu Ali. And it's a historical reality. He went up against Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, and he definitely had his support. The idea that Imam Ali was practicing tuqya, for me, is hard to believe, but that is a Shia view, that Imam Ali really felt that he should have been the caliph immediately after the Prophet ﷺ died, and that there was great wrongs done to the family of the Prophet ﷺ. Now, the Shia historically fall into different categories. The Rawafid and the Ghulat of the Shia were tended to be looked very, very negatively by the people of Sunnah. But there were Shia whose tashayya was khafif, and Imam al-Bukhari relates Shia in Sahih al-Bukhari. And a lot of people don't know that, but there are Shia transmitters in Sahih al-Bukhari. So this idea that the Shia were all evil and something like that is not an early view of things. But the Rawafid and the people, at-ta'nu fi ashabi Rasulillah, those people that spoke ill or spoke ill of Aisha radiallahu anhu, generally were looked upon very negatively by the ulama that came to be known as the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And all I would say is that the Shia tradition is an alternative narrative. And from within the Shia tradition itself, it's a very strong argument, which is why they have very brilliant scholars, and some of them are extraordinarily well versed in all the sciences of Islam, Arabic, and so from within their perspective, it all makes sense, and that's why the Muslims have never been able to really resolve this problem. There have always been brilliant Shia scholars, and there have been debates in the community, and it's just insoluble. So it's best left like that. It's just not, the best thing that we can have is just a peaceful coexistence, which has happened throughout history in many, many places. The Muslims and the Sunnis and the Shias have lived together without problems in many places. Al-Ahsa is a good example. Half the city is Shia and the other half is Sunni. And the Shia keep to themselves, the Sunnis keep to themselves. They don't hate each other. They just live their kind of separate lives, and they don't have those kind of problems. In America in particular, we should really avoid conflicts between the Sunni and Shia. I mean, it's really important here that we really avoid some of the baggage from back home. That's my view about things. I'm very committed to Sunni tradition, is what I was taught. It also makes the most sense to me personally. I mean, I looked at the Shia tradition. I was interested in it for during that early period when, during the Iranian Revolution, I got interested in it just as a phenomenon. And for me personally, I've never had any allegiance to anything other than the truth. I mean, I'm just not interested in a kind of tribal approach to religion. Like, I'm Bani Sunnah and they're Bani Shia and our tribe's better than their tribe. If something appears to me to be true, right? And but I would say one thing, that the Ahl Sunnah downplayed considerably what happened. And if you study the history, there's two versions. One is a very whitewashed history, which tends to be taught. And the other is what really happened. And what really happened is actually kind of hard to believe. What happened to the family of the Prophet, the insurrections that occurred, the brutality that was directed against them, it's all history. It's not something that people can say did not happen. It did happen. Muli Idris is a good example of that, who fled from the Hijaz to Morocco and founded the Adarisa Dawla there in Morocco, which the Moroccans tend to claim that it was Maliki, and some say that he was actually part of the Shia tradition. So, Allahu Alam. But from that tradition, the Zaydiya, who are the people of northern Yemen, geographically northern. Yemen's one country now, but geographically in the northern part of Yemen, you have the Zaydiya. And the Zaydiya, who are called the Fivers as well, because you have the Fivers, the Seveners, and the Ithna Ashariya, the Twelvers. The Zaydiya are the closest from the Shia community to the Ahl Sunnah. They don't speak ill of Abu Bakr or Omar. They don't have a problem with their Khalifa, but they prefer Imam Ali over those two, and felt that he should have been the first caliph. So that's their view. And Imam Shawkani, who arguably is not a Zaydi, he was raised a Zaydi, and he was raised in that tradition. So, but he's an example of just an incredibly brilliant scholar. So the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, which is a formula that came later, how we have been described, is the people of the prophetic way and congregation. So they're the people of Sunnah, and the idea is not that the Sunnah, the Shia have hadith, and they follow hadith, and they have practices that they do, but the Ahl Sunnah are the people of the hadith methodology that was articulated by the great scholars of hadith, and in attempting to follow the prophetic practice to the best. And the Jama'ah is the majority, which the Sunnah tradition is the majority tradition. So they are the Jama'ah, they are the majority. So they're the congregation. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Yadullahi ma'al Jama'ah." The hand of God is with the congregation. And he said, "Man shadda shadda finnar." People that deviate off into it's a hellish deviation. So it was used initially to distinguish himself from the Rafida and the Khawarij. The Rafida are the ghulat of the Shia, the extremists from amongst the Shia, and the Khawarij are the people who made takfir of Muslims. They called other Muslims kafir, and they became insurrectionists. They broke off from the civil governance. The jurist and heresiologist Shaykh Abdul Qahir bin Tahir bin Muhammad al-Baghdadi Isfarayini is one of the great scholars. He died in 429. But he said that the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah comprise 8 categories. And this is very useful for you to understand how, because he's one of the early scholars. 429 is considered he's not from the Salaf. Some say the Salaf goes up to the 5th century, so he would be included in the Salaf. But he's from that very early period. And but he says the first category is the group who mastered the various aspects of Tawheed. So they're the theologians of the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. They know about the nubuwat, prophecy, the eschatological aspects of theology, that relate also to rewards and punishments in the hereafter, as well as the conditions of ijtihad. So they know how ijtihad is done. In all of this, they have gone the route of the people of attributes from our theologians, the people of sifat, because the Mu'attila nullified the attributes of God. And the Ahl Sunnah affirm the attributes of God, that God, when He speaks about attributes, that He does have those attributes, and that they are to be affirmed and not nullified. And then they're free of anthropomorphism, tajsim, so they don't believe literal things like that God is literally in a place, or He's literally on a physical throne, things like that. They don't believe those things. They say, we believe Ar-Rahman al-Arsh istawa. We believe in it. You either say, ala muradillah, whatever God meant by it, I believe in it. But what occurs to the mind, it's other than that, because that's impossible for God. That's called ta'wil ijmali. The later ulama gave it a ta'wil tafsili, a detailed interpretation, and said what it meant. So that's the position of the people who are not anthropomorphous. And then also the Jahmiyyah, who, for instance, said that the essence of God is everywhere. It's like a panentheism. And other groups like the Najariya. The second category is the Imams of Jurisprudence, from the two groups of juristic reasoning and transmission, the people of Hadith and the people of Ray. Ahlul Ray are like the Hanafis, Ahlul Hadith like the Hanbalis and Shafi'is, and then the Imam Malik joins between the two. So they believe in those groups, and they're free from i'tizal, the type of absolute dependence on rationalism, and also the jabar, which is a belief in determinism. So they're neither determinists nor are they people that believe in absolute free will. They're between the two. And they believe in the raising of the graves as well as the questioning in the grave, because there's people that deny the questioning of the grave. They believe in the bodily resurrection. They also believe in the reality of the intercession and the forgiveness of all wrongs from Allah, with the exception of shirk. And obviously that, and we'll get into that, but that is people who willingly commit shirk. They affirm the continuity of the paradise for its people and the torment of fire for the rejectors of truth. So the idea that the paradise it's what they call in scholastic terminology, aeviternal. It goes on forever, although it had a beginning. And they also believe in the obligation of congregational prayer, Jumu'ah, behind all imams. So Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah pray behind imams as long as they're free of heresy and deviation. In other words, bid'ah and zandaqah. But if they're a bad person, you still pray behind them, if they're a reprobate. And they confirm the permissibility of wiping over the khuf socks. And what's important about that, and it seems like a silly issue to bring up, it's even in the creed of Imam Tahawi, but the real issue was about mutawatir hadith and whether the hadith reaches the status of the Quran, because the Quran doesn't mention khuf. It tells you have to wipe the feet, but the khuf is mentioned in the hadith, and it's a mutawatir hadith. So the reason they say and they believe in the khuf, what they're really saying is they believe that a mutawatir hadith has the same value as a verse of Quran. I mean, that's really what they're saying. They just use that ruling because that's a rule. The Khawarij rejected that. So that was a major issue in the early period. The Khawarij said you can't wipe off over the socks. And then they also believe that the pronouncement of divorce is 3 times binding. All right? Because this is an interesting issue that's been raised now in modern times. They believe that the temporary marriage is prohibited, mut'a is prohibited, and that they also deem obedience to authority of the state as an obligation, as long as there's not anything that constitutes agreed upon disobedience to Allah. So they believe in civil governance and that you actually have to obey the state, that you cannot enter into insurrection against the state. This is a really important point about the Ahl Sunnah, is that they're against the Khawarij view that insurrection is acceptable. And then, and this includes the companions of Malik, Shafi'i, Awza'i, Thawri, Abu Hanifa, Ibn Abi Layla, Layth, Abu Thawr, and the companions of Ahmed ibn Hanbal, as well as the Ahl al-Zahir, the literalist in fiqh. It includes them. And all of the other scholars who believed in the matters of intellectual understanding, the way of the people of attributes, and did not dilute their beliefs with any innovations of the people of heresy and deviation. The third category is those people who have mastered the science of hadith and their various chains and pathways that lead back to the Prophet. Those who were able to distinguish between sound and weak transmissions. And they mastered the science of critical analysis and assessment of men and women in the chains of transmission and the various reasons they are acceptable or rejected. Moreover, they do not dilute any of their knowledge with innovations of the people of heresy and deviation. So the muhaddithun are from the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. The fourth category is the people who've mastered the humanities, including grammar and morphology, and followed the guidelines of the Imams of language. So that's a very important aspect of the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. People, the poets, the people that master the Jahili poetry, the people that spend their lives preserving language, even though it's not related to the religion itself as a religious science. It's an ancillary science to religion, right? It's not a religious science. It's a science that religion is dependent upon. But because those people preserve that science, they're considered part of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. So it's when you meet people that love grammar and want to study language, they shouldn't be discouraged like, oh, you're wasting your time. You should be studying Quran. You know, there's people that tell them that. You're wasting your time. No, you need those people because you can't understand the Quran without those people. And that's why the Sunni, the Muslims generally always honored grammarians and philologists and the people of poetry and adab, of literature, always. Imam al-Hariri, you know, these were great scholars of language. So that's important. And then the fifth category, and amongst them are Khalil, Abu Amr ibn Ala, Sibawi, Al-Farra, Al-Akhfash, Al-Asma'i, Al-Mazini, Abu Ubaid, and other imams from the Kufans, the grammarians, that did not dilute their knowledge with innovations of Rawafida or the Qadariyya or the Khawarij or the Mu'tazili. Like Imam Zamakhshari was a Mu'tazili. And the Ahl Sunnah have a soft spot for him because he was such a genius and his tafsir is so essential to the tafsir tradition. I mean, many scholars admitted that their favorite tafsir was the tafsir of Imam Zamakhshari. So even though he was Mu'tazilite, the Sunni scholars had a soft spot for him for that reason. And he was very self-deprecating. He was an interesting man. The fifth category is those who have mastered the variants of Quran, the different commentaries. So the Mufassirun and the Qurra, the people of the Quran. The sixth category is the virtuous ascetics and Sufis who penetrated the reality of this world and left it for others, who tested things and took them from the lessons of discernment, who were pleased with the divine decree and content with what was easily obtained, who realized that the hearing, sight, and heart are all things that man is asked about, both the good and the bad, who took themselves to account even if it concerned the weight of an ant, and thus they prepared for Judgment Day the best provision. Their words followed the two ways of the outward meaning and the inward indication in accordance with the methodology of the people of Hadith, without using it simply to entertain with clever art forms of speech. They do not do good deeds to show off, nor do they leave them out of modesty. Their way is that of the unique, al-wahid, and they negate any anthropomorphism. Their school is that of turning the matter over to Allah. So these are the people of tasawwuf that are rightly guided, and they're very clearly demarcated historically. Imam Junaid is an imam by consensus. Everybody accepts Imam Junaid. And he was called Imam al-Ta'ifatain. He was a faqih in the Thawri madhab, but he was also a man of tasawwuf. So tasawwuf has there are two branches of tasawwuf. The first is a fard ayn, which is like what's in purification of the heart. That aspect of tasawwuf, which is purifying your heart. Imam al-Fakihani, one of the great Maliki scholars, said, before you set out to study knowledge, you should purify your heart. Because you will never benefit from knowledge if your heart is impure. And he said, preparing your heart for knowledge is like preparing the earth for planting. Before you actually put seed into the earth, you have to cultivate the earth with a plow. And he said that's what you had to do with your heart. So removing the negative qualities and adorning the heart with the positive qualities. The awwal at-tawadu' at-takalluf. The beginning of humility is forcing yourself to be humble. So that was very important. And the people of tasawwuf were the people that focused on that aspect. And that's why tasawwuf is one of the sciences of Islam. To deny tasawwuf is to deny الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ, the people who have khushu' in their prayer. I guarantee you there's no fiqh book that talks about how you get khushu'. It'll tell you that you have to have khushu' in your prayer for at least lahza. Like in the Maliki madhab, if you have to have some khushu' in your prayer, even if it's a moment. But it doesn't tell you how you develop khushu', because it's not the object of fiqh. It's not one of the topics of fiqh. That is in tasawwuf. And that's the word that was used by the Muslims historically, is tasawwuf. So those people that deny tasawwuf are the same type of people that deny madhabs and that deny, Tawheed, ilm al-kalam. This is the same type of people. And it's very unfortunate, that this has happened, but it's one of the unfortunate aspects of the modern phenomenon of Islam. That the Prophet said the end of time will not come until the later people condemn the earlier people. لا تقوم الساعة حتى يسب آخر هذه الأمة أولها. So the Prophet mentioned that the later people are going to condemn the earlier people. So, but that's also, it's important to point out that there's a lot of innovations in what goes under the category of tasawwuf. So it doesn't mean tasawwuf, we just accept anybody who says they're a Sufi and we accept anything that calls itself tasawwuf. No, tasawwuf is based on the book and the sunnah. And if you don't find a firm foundation in the book and the sunnah, it's rejected. And that's what the Imams of tasawwuf said. Imam Junaid said, هذا العلم مقيد بكتاب الله وسنة رسول الله. This is a science that is absolutely rooted in the book of Allah and the sunnah of the Prophet. And so if you don't find it in the book of Allah, Imam al-Tusturi, Sahar al-Tusturi said, or Darimi, one of them, said that, he said, ما سمعت كلمة من القوم إلا عرضتها على شاهدين عادلين كتاب الله وسنة رسول الله. That I never heard anything from the Sufis except that I put it before two just witnesses to testify for or against it. And that's the book of Allah and the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So that is the way of tasawwuf. And that's what he's saying. Those are the people that are rightly guided. Not the false ones, not the, you have the skewer people and the snake handlers. Just like in Christianity, you have the people that take literally the handling of snakes or speaking in tongues and things like that. You have those manifestations of religion in every tradition, but that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about a scholastic tradition that also relates to practice and experience. The second aspect of tasawwuf is the science of ahwal and maqamat, the science of states and stations. Because if you're on a strong spiritual path, if you're doing a lot of dhikr and meditation, getting up at night, things start happening. And some of it, there's ways to distinguish between inward sensory terrestrial, inward sensory celestial, inward meaning terrestrial, inward meaning celestial, outward terrestrial, outward celestial, outward meaning terrestrial, outward meaning celestial, outward meaning terrestrial, inward, outward terrestrial, sensory. I mean, those are all categories in that science, and they look at things. So people will have what they think is a spiritual experience, and it's not. It's just your ego. But you think you had this amazing spiritual experience. It was purely ego. Or it could have been demonic. Because there are khawatir shaytaniyah, and people think they're having, I had this amazing experience. And it was a demonic experience. I mean, seriously, there's people that feel the Holy Ghost infusing them. They have amazing experiences. There's people that have sensory experiences and they're convinced that they're deep spiritual experience. There's people that take LSD and think that they've had enlightenment. Really. It's not, it's real. These things are real. There's people that go into psychotic states and they're convinced. I mean, I've had people come to me seriously. I mean, I've seen people go mad from dhikrullah. Mad. From doing things that they shouldn't have been doing. People have come to me and told me they're the Mahdi. And completely believing it. And saying, I had these experiences. You have to listen to me. Those, you have to be able to distinguish between those. To know what's happening to you. And if you don't know that science, you go to somebody who knows that science. Because you need help. Like a doctor, you need to go to a doctor. Just like if you start having hallucinations, you go to a doctor. Well, if you start having spiritual experiences, you need somebody to put those into a perspective. The same with true dreams. There's people that have dreams and they think they've had a dream, and it means exactly the opposite of what they think it means. There's people that have dreams, that they're eating pork and they think that it's something haram. And read what Ibn Sirin says about seeing yourself eating pork. It's not necessarily a negative thing, but it depends. Dreams are all mysterious, and that realm of the dream world is very mysterious, but it has meaning, and there are people that know those meanings. It's not the things that you can learn in a book. Like Ibn Sirin wrote a book on dreams. It's an interesting book, but it's very dangerous to use that book to interpret dreams. One lady came to Aisha and she told her dream. She gave a negative interpretation. The Prophet got very upset with her. So, that's a science, the science of dream interpretation. And there's people that know that science. And then there's people that don't. And there's people that think they do. And they're the big problem. So, the seventh category are the murabitun. And those are the people that guard the borders of Islam and defend the Muslims from encroachment of people attacking them. They defend women and the homes of the Muslims, and they display adherence to the Sunnah and Jama'ah. And they follow the verse that said, those who struggle for our sake, we will guide them to our ways. The eighth category, and this is very important, is the general population of the lands of the Muslims where Sunni Islam is dominated, notwithstanding areas in which deviation has been predominant. What we mean by this is general Muslim people who believe that the scholars of the Sunnah wal Jama'ah are correct in the matters that concern the just sacred law and the theological issues, as well as the eschatological matters of the hereafter. They refer back to their scholars in order to understand their religion, and they imitate them in the branches of jurisprudence that relate to the permissible and the impermissible. Moreover, they do not believe in any of the innovations and deviations of the people of heresies. They are those who have been characterized by the Sufis as the stuff of paradise. Hashwal Jannah. They fill up paradise, majority of people. So these are the groups of the people of Sunnah and Jama'ah, and together they constitute the true and upright deen and straight path. May Allah make us firm with the firmest words in this life and the next. Indeed, He answers appropriately and He is capable of all things. So that's Imam al-Isfaraini's categories. I think they're very useful for people. The idea of attacking people for their religion is something that in traditional Islam the Muslims were very flexible. It's very difficult to get out of Islam. You have to do something really egregious to get out of this religion. Ahmed ibn Hanbal said, the only thing that can get you out of this religion is to deny the very thing that got you in the religion. That's what he said. He said, لا يخرجك من هذا الدين إلا إنكار ما أدخلك فيه, which is لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله. And so it's very hard to do that. The ma'lum min ad-din bid-darura, I mean, we'll go into that, but generally the ulama did not make takfir of people, and that's one of the hallmarks of the people of Sunnah, is they don't make takfir of other Muslims. Even like the Shia and whoever, they don't make takfir of people that say La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, unless there's specific, I mean, there are ways in which people can anathematize themselves, but even for those people, there is a process. It's not just done. You don't just call somebody a kafir. There's a qadi, and people actually, historically, there were ways in which that was done. It wasn't done lightly at all. It's very hard to, and they would look for ta'wil. They would try to find some excuse for the person. Maybe you believe this, or maybe you think that. You mentioned the permissibility of praying behind any imam. That only means the ruler. When it says that we pray behind all imams, in Imam Tahawi's aqidah. So praying behind any imam means the ruler, the Imam al-Akbar. And that has to, like if you're in Morocco and Muli Muhammad, I mean they don't do this anymore. But if he led the prayer and you say, nah, he's a fasiq, or that's considered like a Khariji view, because I mean, as far as I know, he's an upright person. I don't know anything otherwise, so I'm not going to make any assumptions about him. But if there were known things about the ruler that they weren't the best of Muslims, you still pray behind them. As for imams that you pray behind in your masjid, they should not be reprobates. They should be known to have upright character. If they're known to have disreputable character, then you don't pray behind them. You don't pray behind fasiqun bil jariha or fasiqun bil i'tiqad in fiqh. Somebody who's a reprobate either in his belief or in his practice. And then you mentioned that the majority of scholars believe that the prophets, peace be upon him, did not commit even minor sins. What about Adam taking the apple? Well, I mean, trust me, they've worked out all that stuff. With Adam alayhi salam, it was about his intention. Like he did not know. He thought that Iblis was giving him sincere advice because they were like children. And so they didn't know that anybody would lie to them. And so he actually believed what he was doing was a beneficial thing, that it wasn't going to be a harmful thing. And so it was about niyyah. And that's why it says, he forgot. So he didn't intentionally disobey Allah, because you have to have intention. In ma'asiyah, you have to know it's a ma'asiyah when you disobey him. Now, there are certain things where ignorance is not an excuse, even in Sharia. But generally, if you don't do something willfully, there's not an intention behind it, it's not considered disobedience in that way. So, and there are many other examples of that. I mean, all the prophets have been excused, and the excuses have been written in great detail. I work with schizophrenics who have auditory and visual hallucinations where they actually say they see people. Could that be demonic presence or jinn? Well, there's an interesting book called In the Presence of Other Worlds by Van Doren. And he was a psychiatrist at Sonoma State Mental Institution. And he initially did not believe. He was a materialist. But after working 20 years in that institution, he came to the conclusion that there really were things happening. So, we definitely believe in jinn, and jinn do cause problems. I mean, jinn can preoccupy people, and the best protection against them is to be in wudu, to do the mu'awwidhatayn. The Prophet did the mu'awwidhatayn every day. Those type things. There's definitely madness. I mean, madness is real. The Arabic word for being mad is majnoon, which literally means like possessed. So, and obviously there's benign jinn, and then there's malevolent jinn, and then there's mischievous jinn that aren't so, they're malevolent in their, in that they're mischievous, but there are a lot of benign jinn. And I mean, some cultures get obsessed with jinn. I think a lot of these hallucinations go away with, certain drugs now that they have, so they can suppress these type things. So, I mean, obviously we know, like, people that have taken LSD. I mean, I never took LSD, but I know people that have, and people that have taken LSD had very extraordinary experiences on that drug, and so obviously the possibilities of the mind are endless. I mean, the mind is, Imam Ali said, تحسب نفسك جرم صغير وفيك انطوى العالم الأكبر. You think yourself to be an insignificant creature, but in you all of the worlds are wrapped up. That we're a microcosm of all of existence, and there's a lot of weird stuff in the world. I mean, there's a lot of very strange stuff. I mean, if you've ever seen like mad people that really talk to, I mean, they're having a conversation, like, would you shut up, leave me alone? And I mean, it's real. So whatever's happening, Allahu Alam, whether that's jinn or just a type of madness that the mind plays on itself, Allahu Alam, but we do believe in mess. Mess is real. Like, people can get a type of possession, and the Quran mentions that, the mess. So it's real. And I know some people that have had very weird experiences. I mean, I think most people, George Leonard talks about the weird scale. There's certain things that you'll tell everybody. There's certain things you'll tell your close friends. There's certain things you'll only tell your wife or your husband. And then there's certain things you just keep to yourself. So, I mean, everybody's had experiences that are very strange, I think. Most people, at least. I certainly have. I mean, I've got some things I wouldn't tell anybody. But, where does Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal fall in the position of the Quran being Kalam Allah and not creation, apart from the three Imams you mentioned? Imam Ahmad is the one that stood up in defense of the uncreatedness of the Quran. He was imprisoned for it during the mihna of the people of I'tizal. So Imam Ahmad he stood up for that. Aisha radhiyallahu anha said, "Ma bayna dafatay al-mushaf kalam Allah." What's between the two covers of the mushaf is the kalam Allah. So we do say that, and it's not the kalam Allah, but the kalam Allah that is uncreated. That's where the Sunni scholars differentiated. That's all. That if you read the Quran. And they say that it's only permissible to say this in a teaching environment. Like, you don't say this, you don't go out and say, oh, that's not the Quran, or that's not, it's only permissible to say this in a teaching environment, that if I say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, that was sound waves that emanated from my breath and through my vocal cords, and they reached your ears because they're in the world. So that coming into the world of the speech of Allah, that's what they're differentiating. That speech is not what we mean by the uncreated word of Allah. Is that clear to everybody? Yeah, that's what they mean. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I wrote a paper called "Who Are the Disbelievers?" It's online, and I went into great detail about that. Generally, I mean, I incline towards the position of Imam Ghazali, who says that the majority of human beings will have salvation in the end. Yeah, no, he uses, I mean, he bases it on, he doesn't base it he didn't just say that. He based it on, well, I mean, there's scholars that limit greatly the mercy of God, and, but there's a reason why it's not permissible to do ta'yin, and that's all of our ulama say that. You cannot say any individual is going to hell, because only God can judge people. And I think the best position is to be concerned about where you're going and not where other people are going. I mean, Muslims tend to obsess about where other people are going, and the real problem is not where they're going, it's where I'm going, or where, But generally, the kufr is to reject truth once it's clear to you. And Imam Ghazali said that people who have been given distorted versions of Islam and reject the distortions do not fall under the category of kafir. Because they're not rejecting Islam. They're rejecting a distorted version of an Islam that says you have to blow yourself up to get close to God, or something like that. I mean, if I thank God that I became Muslim, 32 years ago, because I don't know how I would feel about Islam if I was living in this type of environment and being bombarded on a daily basis with all this negativity, and then seeing insane Muslims. Because you have to wonder, what's going on with those people? Really, I mean, just average people here, why are they so angry? Well, you drop bombs on people, they tend to get angry. That's true. But on the other hand, if it's really a spiritual teaching, then why are the bombs being dropped on you? I mean, that's also a question. Because I can say to people here, you shouldn't drop bombs on people. But the people that are getting bombs dropped on them have to ask themselves, why is this happening? What is it saying about our state? What have we done collectively? Because the problem, one of the things that the Quran is very clear about is that calamities, when corruption spreads, the response to corruption is calamity. That's very clear. Surah Ar-Rum, Allah says that He causes you to taste tribulation to humble you and to call you back to the truth. But what the Quran says is, أَتَّقُوا فِتْنَةً لَا تُصِيبَنَّ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا مِنْكُمْ خَاصَّةً. Be fearful of calamities that don't just afflict the guilty, they hit everybody. So you can't say that they're all bad or evil. No, when corruption spreads, it brings on calamities that afflict everybody. I mean, for instance, there are venereal diseases that are a direct result of people practicing certain sexual practices that have brought on those diseases. But then, blood gets contaminated and the innocent child gets the transfusion. You say, oh, what did they do to deserve that? That's the whole point. That if only the guilty got afflicted, the innocent would never care about changing anything because, they'll get what they deserve. But once you realize, no, it affects us all, then the impetus to actually call to virtue and to decry vice becomes much stronger. And that's part of what people of God are supposed to be doing. They're witnesses. So they're here to to witness the truth. And part of witnessing the truth is condemning what's wrong.
Yeah, so it's just like, when we are approached by Christians, they ask.
Yeah, no, yeah. Well, Jews and Christians are Abrahamic people. And they both believe in one God. Even Christians with the Trinity, if you get into real Christian theology, it's very confusing, and most average Christians don't really understand it. But if you get into, if you read Aquinas on the Trinity, it's very clear that he doesn't believe God's like three separate beings or three separate parts. He believes in infinite God. Insubstantiality is part of the Catholic and Orthodox belief about God, that the God's not like anything, right? So, they're muwahidun, and the verses in the Quran are very clear. The hadiths are clear that people of Tawheed, there will be a point in which everybody who believes in one God is removed from the fire. The Prophet did, however, in Sahih Muslim, it's a ahad hadith, but the Prophet did say, no Christian or Jew will hear about me and die not believing in me, except that they'll enter the fire. And that hadith is understood, obviously, that they know he's a prophet, So if you reject a prophet, you're in a dangerous situation because he's in the line of prophets. But and even the Hindus and the Buddhists and all these other people, most of them, the Quran says, "La taj'alu lillahi andadan wa antum ta'lamun." Don't set up idols with God once you know. And that's called jumla haliyah in Arabic. The hal of the people is that they know that they shouldn't be doing that. And that's why even the people of shirk are not condemned to hellfire if they weren't given a message or made to understand that what they were doing was wrong. That's why the Ahl Sunnah believe that the Ahl al-Fatra are saved. That's the dominant opinion. There's a khilaf opinion, but I just feel like, why do people want to, if there's a debate and the ulama are saying that these people are saved, one of my favorite hadiths is about the Prophet ﷺ said that two men, Allah condemns them to the fire, and so they start heading towards the fire, but one of them looks back. It's a hadith says, "Yaltafitu." So Allah stops him and says, "Why'd you look back?" He said, "I thought you were going to forgive me." And so Allah says, "Udkhul jannati," enter into my paradise, just because of his good opinion of God. Like the other one just said, I knew I'd never get forgiven. So have a good opinion of God. I've met wonderful Christians that, I'm sorry, I have a hard time believing God's just going to zap them. It's just, if you read the descriptions of the evil people in the Quran, they're puffed up, they're arrogant, they don't feed the poor people. Read the descriptions of the kuffar in the Quran. And they're not people of humility. They're people that reject the truth even though they know it's the truth. They're people that won't listen, they plug their ears. So, I'm not, I believe in the Aqidah and what I was taught, and I'm not in any way giving some kind of California version of Islam. So I want to make that clear, But these things, this is in the tradition, and that's what it's like Ibn Rushd You know, he talked about whether or not the Quran, if you read the Quran for dead people, does it benefit the dead people or not? There's a khilaf, there's a difference of opinion. Ibn Rushd says, this is a difference of opinion about the mercy of God. Shouldn't we err on the side of mercy? Like that it benefits them? Given that there's a difference of opinion, no, it doesn't benefit them. You know, I mean, I'm sorry, I would prefer that opinion that it benefits them. You know, and the proofs are strong. The proofs are strong. So the other people have their opinion, but it's very interesting about people that, you know, it's like the man who urinated in the masjid. And I never understood this until I lived with Bedouin. I was once talking to a Bedouin, and he literally unbuttoned his thing and turned around and urinated right in front of me. Like Bedouin are like that, you know. So I never understood that hadith until that happened to me. You know, I mean, Bedouin just urinate whenever they get the urge, you know, and it's desert and they just cover it up with sand or whatever. But anyway, you know, the Bedouin urinated in the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ. Now the Sahaba wanted to kill this guy. The Prophet told the man to just cover him. You know, like put things so he was hidden. And when he finished, you know, the Prophet went up and he said, look, you know, this is a place of purity. You know, don't urinate in the masjid. But the Sahaba were so angry. I mean, I don't want to say, you know, that they were, anyway. But they were angry. And so this man, you know, when he saw how they reacted, and then he saw how the Prophet ﷺ reacted, he just said, Allahumma arhamni wa raham Muhammadan wa la tarham siwana. Oh Allah, forgive me and forgive Muhammad and don't forgive anybody else. You know, and the Prophet ﷺ said, Hajjart al-wasi', you know, you've narrowed the vast. You know, and that's what these people do. They just narrow the vastness of God. Ma qadrullah haqqa qadrihi. God can forgive anybody. And the Maturidi believe ikhlaf al-wa'id does not diminish God. In other words, if you fail to fulfill your promise, that diminishes you. But if you fail to fulfill your threat, it actually enhances you. And that's the Maturidi opinion, that if God threatens you to do something, and if he chooses not to fulfill his threat, like if he threatens to send you to hell, and then he doesn't do that, that it actually, it enhances God's esteem. It doesn't diminish it. Unlike if he promised you paradise for doing something, then you do it, and then he doesn't give you paradise, that diminishes. It's just like I say, well, if you come, I'm gonna really, you'll see, I'm gonna take my vengeance on you. And then you come and I say, you know, I thought about it, I forgive you. People say, mashallah, you know, that's a high thing. It's not a low thing. So Allah, I mean, there's a man who had himself burnt after he died. This is in the Sahih hadith, right? Does everybody know that hadith? People know that hadith? He had himself burnt, cremated. And he told his sons to spread his ashes out, right? When the Prophet said he was brought before God, and God said, why did you do that? And he said, because I didn't want you to resurrect me, because I was so afraid of being judged by you. That belief that he could somehow scatter his ashes and God couldn't bring him back together, that's kufr. And that belief is kufr because it's isti'jaz qudratillah. It's considering that God's not omnipotent, that he's not all powerful. You actually think that God can't do something. That's kufr. And yet God forgave that man. This is clear in the hadith. I mean, God can forgive whomever he pleases. I mean, even if you look at the verse that إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَغْفِرُ أَن يُشْرَكَ بِهِ. You know, I mean, if you just look at the way the verse was revealed, it doesn't say he won't forgive the mushrik. It says أَن يُشْرَكَ بِهِ. He doesn't forgive the act of shirk. Somebody can pardon a murderer, but he doesn't forgive the murder. I recently saw an interview with one of the Imams of the Haram saying that those who condemn Aisha or Omar are considered kuffar. Is this correct? If they say that Aisha that she was not free of what God freed her from, the claim that she committed adultery, that's kufr, because that's Nasr Quran. If they consider her to have betrayed the Prophet ﷺ by opposing Ali or whatever, that's fisq according to the Sunni scholars. But it's not kufr. So it depends on what they say. And it's, again, ta'wil. Most of these things are done with ta'wil. Like, they don't, the people that attack the Sahaba don't attack them because they're Sahaba. It's important to understand that. They're not saying we don't like them because they're Sahaba. They're saying we don't like them because they betrayed the Prophet. Do you see? That's their ta'wil. We don't accept the ta'wil, but that's why it's not kufr. Do you understand the distinction there? Because it's an important distinction. I feel uncomfortable when people say we should not pray behind the Shia because I feel that we are saying their prayer is not accepted. No, their prayers, we're not saying that their prayer is not accepted at all. But, that's what I learned in my teachers, and I can't, I'm not going to go against that. If I've prayed behind Shia before, and the Shia prayer is the same prayer that we pray. I mean, they have the same number of rakats, they recite the Fatiha, they do everything that we do. So the prayer is not like some alien prayer to Islam. A person on the path of Yusuf, how can they distinguish between demonic experience and a good spiritual experience? Well, I mean, like I said, it's a science. The khawatir is a science. Nafsani, Rabbani, Malakani, Shaitani. I mean, there's different types of thoughts. There's different types of, like qabd and basat are experiences. Generally true spiritual experiences are often, there can be initial contraction and then followed by an expansion. There's different, the Prophet ﷺ, when he first had the revelation, his initial experience was contraction. And then he had this incredible expansion, which is, even in Catholicism, they call it the law of discernment. They have that understanding. So, and then there are other experiences that, but generally, if the experience leads to humility, to being humbled by it, then it's a true experience. If it leads to feeling like that you're special or something, then it's from nafs or shaitan. Nafsani experiences are very tricky. The demonic experiences are usually a lot clearer, but nafsani are very tricky. Demonic is usually always followed by a sense of pride, wanting to tell other people about it. True spiritual experiences are best kept to yourself, unless you go to a master. But it's best kept to yourself, not to talk to it about other people, because of the problem of riya and ostentation and spiritual pride. Spiritual pride is very real and very difficult to excise from the nafs. I think it's time for Isha, isn't it? Yeah. Is it way past? Yeah, no, we should pray Isha on time. All right. Alhamdulillah. Subhanakallahumma bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa baraka ala sayyidina wa habibina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam taslima. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala mursalin walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.